Is it facing you?
Does it say record? You can see me on there? Pretty good. Okay. Okay, so we'll go ahead and start. I'll speak to the people that are watching online mostly. I'm going to record both review sessions. I'm doing 2 different ones this time to make it easier for people to hear. So if you are taking notes, you don't have to take notes on both of them. So just kind of watch and see when I do the second one, when that starts, and then just go ahead and start your notes from the first one to the end of the first one. Don't worry about the second one. And again, if you're taking notes online, make sure you put time signatures. So put like at 2 minutes you talked about this, at 4 minutes you talked about this, whatever, and be fairly thorough on that as well. So for everybody now, the tests are always the same format. The first half are matching in groups of 10, and that's 50 questions. So we have 5 chapters. There's 10 questions per chapter, and those are almost all terms. If you were in class today, the questions we went over are nearly identical to what is on the test on Friday. So with the schedule, we've lost a few days in class this year, primarily because of the PLC and innovation stuff at West Fargo. So we've had 4 days that are substantially shorter, and I'm trying to test on Friday because I don't want to test Monday. So since we were a little bit behind, I decided to be a little bit more direct about what's going to be on the test for that part. Okay, so chapter 10, the questions we did today are very similar to what's on the test. Again, there's 10 questions per chapter. Those are all vocab, pretty much straight from the book. The wording on the definition is almost identical as well. So for chapter 6, for example, some of the terms that are in that area that we discussed were transsexual, gender, heterosexuality. Chapter 6 again was on sexuality. Chapter 7 was on deviance. So obviously deviance would be a term in there. Control theory, labeling theory, corporate crime, organized crime. Just think back to the quiz. It's basically the first part in the quiz. Chapter 8 is on social stratification in general. So not global stratification or not race and ethnicity, but again, stratification in general. So stratification is in that section. Class versus caste system, proletarians, meritocracy, wealth, and so on. Chapter 9 is on global stratification, so the distinction between high, middle, and low-income countries is in there. Colonialism and some of the theories related to it. And then lastly, the chapter that we're on right now, chapter 10, is on gender stratification. So obviously gender and gender roles, feminism, sexism, things like that are going to be in there. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time quizzing you on those things unless I see that they're in some of the application sections as well. If at the end of the review session you have some questions on definitions, I can clarify those. Sound like a good idea? Because I think that's just a matter of if you study it and you know it, you should be okay. Agreed? Okay, so let's talk about some of the application questions then. What's the difference between sex and gender? Let's start with that. What's the difference between sex and gender? From a sociological perspective, what's the difference? Yeah, so sex is biological, gender is socially constructed or cultural. Exactly. So, in some civilizations, what's expected of males is different than what's expected of males. Or, like, gender roles might be reversed from one place to another. So, you see that attitudes, culture, behavior, stuff like that tied to sexuality and gender, that stuff changes. It doesn't stay the same. So to take an example of, the United States, a modern example would be the past decade, the change we've seen in social and legal acceptance of same-sex relationships. In 2004, when Howard Dean was kind of pushing to be the Democratic nominee for president, he took a position that same-sex couples should be allowed civil unions, and that was viewed as extreme at the time. Should not be allowed marriage, should be allowed just civil unions. So that's an example of how sexuality has changed just over time. What are some other examples of how sexuality and gender have changed over time, or from place to place? Any other examples? 5,000 degrees. Any other examples? Set this over here so I can spill on this. No other examples of how stuff has changed over time?
Could it be like male dominance? Like women are starting to become more of equal?
Okay. Yeah, that's more with gender stratification, chapter 10. Yeah. But that could be, so you look at, like with the sexual revolution in the 60s, a lot of people point to how technology changes really drive cultural changes. So now I think the average person is a little bit less patient than they used to be. I've made that argument before. And I think a lot of that has to do with cell phones and our quick access to technology. So some of the theorists argue that attitudes and practices with sexuality have changed a lot because of what technological development. What discovery or invention led to changes in norms and beliefs about sexuality and practices. Birth control pill, exactly. So think of some examples and be able to apply some things that have led to those changes. Okay? All right. If you are somebody that's attracted to members of the opposite sex, what would the term for you be? Yep, opposite sex would be heterosexual, same sex. Okay, both sexes. Okay, if you don't really have sexual attractions at all. Okay, good. What if you believe, like you feel that you're a different sex than what you are biologically? Transsexual. What if you have biological components of both? Inter. And we gave the example of the runner from, was it South Africa, or I think it was South Africa for that example. Good. Okay, let's talk about some functions of norms, taboos, and mores regarding sexuality. List one norm that we have related to sexuality that's really strong. Remember, norms are rules. They would say, do this, don't do this, whatever. So give me an example of a norm for sexuality that's very strong in our culture. What do you say? Okay. So some people feel very strongly that heterosexuality is like the only way to go. What function could that norm perform in society? So the norm that says that heterosexual relationships are better or are normal, aren't abnormal compared to homosexual relationships, what function could that perform in society? Yeah, that's the theory, but what does it do is what it's asking. We have strong norms that say that people that are in relationships should be in heterosexual relationships. Those norms are changing, but what's one argument about what those norms do? Let's phrase it this way. What if everybody in the United States decided that they were homosexual, or that everybody was homosexual, or whatever, right? What would a problem with that be? There's no reproduction. So functionalists could argue that norms for behavior like that help to encourage society to perpetuate itself. Because you need people, right, to have society? Okay, let's talk about another norm then. What's another norm that we have that's really strong about sexuality? Okay, stronger than that. I think that's weakened. Okay, incest, taboo. Taboo is the term for the strongest norms. So you see somebody, well, like on Mean Girls, she's like, you know who looks fine tonight? Seth Mozakowski. But he's your cousin. Yeah, but he's my first cousin, you know? So they don't use the term incest, taboo in there, but they're implying that. They're like, no, that's wrong. Okay? Imagine if in the movie she would have said, you know who's looking fine tonight? Seth Mozikowski, but he's your brother. And then she said, yeah, but he's a really good kisser. You know? Matt, would that be even more weird, gross, whatever? Okay. So we have this strong norm that says, don't hook up with your siblings. Why? What function does that carry out? What purpose does it have in society? What does it help do? Let's say you had a family and there were 5 boys and 5 girls, and there was no norm that said don't date your siblings, right? Okay. Would there be any problems? Okay, that's one function that you could argue that it helps to make sure that offspring are born with disabilities. What?
It says under
Any terms that you use are going to relate to all of the theories. They just look at them in a different light, right? So hardcore conflict theorists would say the incest taboo isn't fair because it limits people's choices and tries to control people. So, but a problem with that, what would be a problem if you were like, you can date your siblings if that was viewed as okay? It's so foreign to us that nobody knows the answer. If they said that, let's say you had like four brothers, 4 sisters, whatever, you're sitting down to eat supper, like, would there be some tension there, maybe? Like if 2 of your siblings wanted to date you and Ellie's just like, okay, we get it, don't talk anymore. But yeah, it helps to kind of regulate and control that as well. Okay. Some functionalists also argue that pornography and prostitution have a purpose in society. What are some purposes that functionalists could argue that those have or do?
Prostitution, people who are in relationships.
So the text actually brings that point up. People that are too busy or not deemed important or attractive in society could pay to get access to sexual activity. So it's the same argument for pornography in a way, that it allows people that maybe don't want to go through the work or whatever access to that realm of life. So that's a function of pornography or prostitution. Okay, let's flip it then. What are some dysfunctions or what are some problems with prostitution or pornography? Okay, so prostitution, spread STDs. Any other problems or dysfunctions of pornography or prostitution?
It's dangerous.
Okay, dangerous. Yeah, so. Yeah. Yeah. Remember that stat sheet that I handed out? That had a lot of things on it for chapter 6. So think about, like, not even for the people involved in pornography or prostitution directly, but like what are some arguments that people make about how pornography affects society in general? Okay. Demeans women, treats them as objects, and then there's problems from there. Like if somebody's treated as an object, then it can lead to problems of violence and other things. Okay, another thing that gets addressed with deviance and sexuality here a little bit is the nature-nurture debate. So if we briefly were to summarize it, what is the term nature? Is that biology or is that upbringing? Nature is biology, nurture is environment or how somebody was raised, okay? So, somebody give me an example of an argument about heterosexuality or homosexuality that's tied to nature. What would people that believe in the nature theory more on sexuality argue? Okay, that people of certain sexual attractions are born that way. How about deviance? What's an argument from nature for deviance?
Like nature and nurture. You're born into also like have your parents or like
Yeah.
environments and stuff.
So if you did a study and you found out that there's a gene that was tied to violent or aggressive behavior, is that nature or nurture? Nature. If like parents, they see, a kid sees their parent like push their brothers or sisters around or their spouse around, and they model that behavior, that's nurture. So look at some arguments for that about nature versus nurture debate. What are some weaknesses in some theories of deviance that stress what goes on in a person's mind? What are some weaknesses in theories that address that? If somebody's trying to explain deviance and they're thinking, well, Bethany is violent because she thinks violent thoughts, or whatever. You're the first person I saw when I thought of that example, sorry. But if that's what somebody is arguing, what's a weakness in that approach? What are they not bringing up? Okay, maybe they're not addressing behavior. What else? If I'm like trying to explain violence, other deviant behavior, and I say it's because of what somebody's thinking. So Bethany is aggressive, I'm like, well, she just is angry all the time. She's thinking about this stuff. What am I not taking into account? Like, think of a time where you were really super angry. Was it like you were just sitting around and you started thinking about something and then you got angry? Or did something happen and then that kind of made you angry? What do you think? Something happened. So if all I'm arguing for is, well, Bethany's really angry or aggressive or violent because of what she's thinking about, what am I missing? What would relate that I just gave you an example for? Yeah, so antecedents would be the term that people would use. I don't think we use that term specifically in sociology, but it's another way to look at the social or environmental factors that cause that behavior. So people, like if Schatz is a hardcore Freudian theorist, and she's not really focused so much on the environmental factors, she's missing part of the equation, right? So that's a weakness of it. So be able to identify some weaknesses of that. Okay, you guys remember strain theory? We did a little concept on that, okay? What are some of the categories in strain theory again? Okay, so let's start with this first. What are the variables? What are you're looking at two different things. Okay, the means or the way that people choose to accomplish something. And then what's the other thing that you look at? The goal, okay? So if you need money and you decide to get a job, what would you be in? Conformity, because you've accepted the traditional means and you've accepted the traditional goal. So look through that box and be able to answer a couple questions about, like if I gave you that scenario, be able to say that it's conformity. Okay. All right. Let also be able to apply class, caste, and meritocracy a little bit. So let's say that Brooklyn is born in India in the 1800s. What type of stratification would she experience? Would it be a class, meritocracy, or caste system? Caste system. In a caste system, social position is based on, is it ascription or achievement? Ascription. So you're born Visha, you're a Visha. You can't do anything about it. Okay? You're an untouchable, that's what you are. Okay? In a pure meritocracy, what's the only thing that matters for social class? Achievement and effort. Okay? What does the United States have? We have no, ours is a class system. Any blending of a meritocracy and a caste system at all, no matter what degree, would be considered a class system. So if it's like 98% meritocracy and 2% caste system, they'd still call it a class system. So why can you argue that we're not just meritocracy? We do reward effort and skill, but what else?
It's also on like the birth.
Okay. Yeah, so family, where you were born, the opportunities you have. So you all probably in the United States are slightly, well, depending on where you're at, you're above average in terms of the opportunities you have, I would say here. So rank the school that you're going into, we compare it nationally, you're in a better position than a lot of other people. So be able to identify some things with that. Also be able to identify and apply concepts of social mobility and then status consistency. Social mobility and status consistency. So, if you are somebody that goes to college on an athletic scholarship, you get a bachelor's and a master's, and then you go and play basketball in the NBA and make a lot of money, and your master's degree is in like neuroscience or something that's hard. I don't know. What would you have? Would you have low status consistency or high status consistency? High. So you're getting paid a lot of people know you, you have a lot of power, and you have a degree that's fairly prestigious. If you're a college professor and you're making like $50,000 a year and you don't really have a lot of power, what would you have? Low status consistency, right? So you'll see some examples of that, be able to apply that. So let's talk about social mobility then. What is social mobility in general first? Yeah, so a change in social position in society. So moving up or down. Mobility can be going up or down. So in a caste system, is there high social mobility or low social mobility? Low social mobility, because you can't change, right? So in a meritocracy, there'd be high. In a class system, it kind of depends. Okay, if I start out poor and then I become wealthy later, what type of social mobility would that be? Intra, because it's within my lifetime. If my parents were poor and then I become wealthy later, what would it be? Inter-social mobility. Okay, let's talk about high, middle, and low-income countries. Generally speaking, which hemisphere has the largest concentration of high-income nations? Northern hemisphere. So North America and Europe, especially North and Western Europe, high-income nations. Where, again, generally speaking, where are most of the middle-income nations found? Eastern Europe, Asia. There's a bunch of categories, but yeah, Asia, and then Latin America. Yep. And then low-income nations would be Africa. Okay. Give me some exceptions to that, to those patterns. Like, give me an example of a country in Asia that's high income. Who do we, as a nation, who do we always compete with in the automobile industry? Japan, and then, yeah, Germany too, but Japan would be an example. So think of some anomalies there. Think of things that don't fit, and then, there's a couple questions where it asks you general, but there's not a lot that say like which of the following countries are high, middle, or low. Okay? Okay. There's some discussion on, you're going to want to look up research by Mead, Murdoch, and Lever on gender across the world. Basically, they were studying gender across the world. So Mead and Murdoch mostly focused on gender roles. So what is the most expected behavior of people based on their gender. Lever looked at that as well, but she especially looked at it with children. So, okay, one thing I would say is all of them found that gender mattered. So I keep that in mind, but I'd specifically look for while you're studying what they found specifically, like why did gender matter? And what were some of their arguments as to why they thought that it mattered? So again, it's Margaret Mead, Murdoch, and then Lever. Those three, like what did they argue about gender roles and why did it matter? I'll just leave it at that. Okay. If you're in a family where your mother makes all the decisions, what type of family are you in? Matriarchal family. If your father makes all the decisions, patriarchal. Okay, and Gilligan and Lever's research, they looked at boys and girls and how they play games. What was one difference that they found?
Guys go for victory.
Yeah.
And women like work together.
Okay, so guys like games where there's an emphasis on victory, and then for women it's more about building relationships. Okay, in global stratification we talked about different types of slavery. So be able to identify what some of those are. For example, if we were living in a society where slavery was okay, and Marissa had a bunch of money, and she's like, I want to buy Morgan. And then she bought Morgan. What type of slavery would that be? That's chapter 9. Chattel slavery. Good. Okay. What's it called if like Schuldeis takes out a loan and she can't pay it back, and then Malia is like, now you have to work for me for 10 years. What's that called? Debt bondage. Good. What if you're forced to move from place to place against your will? What type of slavery is that? Human trafficking. Good. Okay, so I mentioned how there weren't a lot. There's a few examples of questions where it says, which of the following is a high income, which is a middle, and which is a low. So be able to identify. If you remember those kind of rules of thumb in general, that will help you out. And then think about this a little bit as well when you get the question, like, if you see a country that you know is in the middle of the Middle East, do you think they're low income? What do you think? In the middle of the Middle East, would you think they're low income? Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Yemen, Oman? Probably not. Why? Yeah, because they have a lot of oil there. So, think about what you know about the world a little bit as you address these. Okay, let's talk about stratification in the United States specifically. What places in the United States tend to have a lot of poverty? Look at like the per capita income of people in certain areas. What places do you know that are pretty rough in that regard?
South?
Be more specific. What are some specific places in the United States where there's a lot of poverty, where per capita income's bad, graduation rates are bad? Okay, yeah, like central Detroit. Detroit's bad. Later when we talk about education, we look at like the graduation rate in Detroit. It's horrible. It's like 15% or something. Okay, so that's one example. Think in North Dakota. Where in North Dakota is there a lot of poverty? No, not really here. Per capita income in this area, the average worker in this area earns more than me. I'm not loaded, but we're like, my wife's a stay-at-home mom, and we're okay. You know what I mean? So, where up north? Okay, what's that more specific?
Native American.
Yeah, reservations. So, like urban areas, you know, like think Old Town Los Angeles. If you have money and you're in Chicago, Los Angeles, do you move like in the middle of the city, or what do you do? Yeah, you go to the suburbs, exactly. So, urban Chicago, urban Detroit, urban LA, border towns in the South. Somebody mentioned the South. And then reservations. So be able to identify and apply some questions with that. Okay, how about population growth rates in the world? Where are they the highest? High, middle, or low income nations? Okay, why is that? Okay, so not a lot of access to birth control. Anything else? Okay, so lack of education. Good. Power relationships between men and women. We're going to watch a video in class tomorrow about a guy in Nigeria that has 86 wives and over 150 children. So they pull up to like an apartment, like that kind of thing over there, and then, you know, it's not as developed as that, but, and then they drive by and there's like 30 kids outside playing, and they're like, here's his family, you know? So, yeah. So in that situation, like, the women say that they like him and they want to stay with him and all that, but he's got a lot more power than they do, right? So if he went to one of them, he's like, I want to have more kids, they pretty much have to. Go. So that's an example of why. So cultural beliefs play a role as well, okay? Okay, we talked about explanations for stratification. Two of the things we addressed were modernization theory and dependency theory. Which one of those is more aligned to functionalism? Modernization theory. So, modernization theory argues that there's two things really that drive the poverty in the low-income nations. One of those things is cultural beliefs. So we watched the video on when they were mining, and the guy made the news anchor take off his shoes because it was bad luck, right? So they have other beliefs like that that limit the ability of people to produce as much stuff as they could. So besides cultural beliefs, what is the other part that's key to modernization theory? What don't they have that makes it harder for them to, yeah, technology, exactly, okay? Now let's flip it, let's talk about dependency theory. What does dependency theory say is the cause of global stratification?
High income countries like making like the low income countries look bad and like rubbing it in their face.
Yeah, not so much necessarily rubbing it in their face, but
It's like
exploitation.
Yeah.
Yep. So I'm from a wealthy country, I own a company. I go to Brooklyn, who's in a poorer country, and I say, I want you to get some gold for me. I'm gonna pay you this much. She's like, okay. And it's really way, way less. So I know that I'm getting a real good deal. She doesn't know that as much. She works with me and I just consistently try to do that. So that's an example. If it's countries exploiting other countries, what is that called? What's the specific term for that? Starts with a C. It was common in the 17 and 1800s. Huh? Colonialism. If it's a country exploiting another country, it's colonialism. What if it's like a super powerful company that exploits a country? What's that called? Neo-colonialism. I saw a stat, I follow a bunch of news stuff on Twitter. I saw a stat that said the richest 83 people in the world right now control more money than the lowest 3.5 billion people. Take the richest 83 people in the world, add up what they have, they control more than like half the world's population, basically. So those people, those 83 people control really large companies. If they go to Liberia or Sudan or Chad and say, hey, we want to do this, like those companies probably have a larger GDP than those entire countries do. You know? So they have a lot of power over those nations. Okay, Let's talk about stratification a little bit more as it relates to the Davis-Moore thesis. So, other than functionalism, conflict theory, and SI theory, the Davis-Moore thesis is probably the most assessed question on this test. Like, I'm looking at the test right now, and there's 5 questions that address it directly. So, let's start with the Davis-Moore thesis, just definition in general, and then we'll apply it. What's the Davis-Moore thesis? What does it say? What does it say? It has to do with stratification. What does it say? It's functional, so it serves a purpose. Yeah, so it's good. Why is it functional?
It's like hard labor, like those jobs.
Okay, we have to attach different rewards to different positions in order to attract people to those positions. So in this section, I'm just going to read the first part of the question to you, but I'm not going to read the quotes to you, but it says this. It says, pick the quote that would most agree with the Davis-Moore thesis. Pick the quote that would most agree with the Davis-Moore thesis. And then there's 5 questions that relate to that. Okay? So if you know the definition, you can apply it, you get 5 questions right there. Okay. When you talk about power, is it just money that matters for stratification, or what else matters? What else matters? Besides money, what else matters? Weber came up with a term for this. What's that term, first of all? For a measure of social power, social position. 3-word term. Last word, status. Yeah, it's actually 2. No, it's 2 words. Yeah. So, socioeconomic status. Okay. So SES is the acronym they use. So, besides money, what else matters? Think about when we talked about status consistency. That'll give you some clues. What else matters? Yeah, ranking. So I'll tell you a story about this. True story from the weight room today. And I'm not going to say who said this. And I want to preface this by saying I don't agree with their logic necessarily. But somebody came up to me and said, "You're like a real teacher, right?" I said, "Yeah, what do you mean?" "Well, you're not just a PE teacher. So you're like a real teacher." And then I laughed. And I said, "I'm going to tell that to the other coaches here." So then I went to all the other coaches that are PE teachers, and I said, "No, I don't agree with this necessarily, but somebody in the weight room looked at me and said, 'Hey, you're like a real teacher. You're not just a PE teacher.'" So in their mind, they're saying that I'm a real teacher. I'm like better than a PE teacher, right? That's what they're implying. So it's not just money. I get paid the same as the PE teachers, assuming I have the same training and same years of experience. But there's a level of prestige that goes with different jobs. So the example I used was like a drug dealer or a stripper, like jobs that are considered deviant. We can find a drug dealer in this country that makes 10 times as much money as me. We probably could find a stripper in this country that makes 10 times as much money as me. But if you go home to meet like your boyfriend's parents, they're like, "What do you do?" "Oh, I make like $500,000 a year." "Yeah, what do you do?" "I'm a stripper." Average boyfriend's parents are going to be like, "Okay," you know what I mean? So it's other things besides just money. Look at what else it would be. Okay. Okay. When we look at low-income nations, be able to identify some stats that demonstrate just how bad life is there, like life expectancy, age of death, stuff like that. Okay, give me an example of a white-collar job. White-collar job.
Banker.
Accountant, banker.
Anything that's not manual.
Okay, yeah, a lot of stuff that's not manual labor. Good. Okay, how about pink collar? Pink collar. Okay, female jobs, so secretary, nurse, kindergarten teacher, dental hygienist. So you'll see examples of occupations and you have to identify whether they're blue collar, white collar, or pink collar. Okay, and then tomorrow we're going to talk about types of feminism. Types of feminism. So it's radical, socialist, and liberal are the three types. Be able to apply those types to scenarios, okay? And then there's a few questions at the end also where it gives you a scenario and you have to identify which theory it matches with. So be able to identify functionalism, conflict theory, and SI as well. Okay. So that is it. Any questions about anything at all for those of you that were at the first session? Okay. Hey, when you walk out, go up to the employees and say thanks for letting us study here for a little bit. Okay? That'd be a good thing. Buy a coffee, whatever. Okay? Be good citizens. Okay? So we still have one more day of notes and then the test is on Friday. If you have questions about the take-home essay or anything, email me. All right?
Yeah, we not even already started it. Don't sit that close to the camera. We thought that you started early, so we were here like 4 minutes early.
No. That was group one. I went along actually is what happened. So. If you can on the bottom in the red section. Thought there'd be more people for the second one, but I guess not. That's okay. You want to come over a little bit too, Grant? Or?
Yeah.
So. Okay.
I'm out.
I think that's funny seeing you guys work out together.
Yeah.
In different. It's still that dynamic where we have some teams together and some teams separate. So. Are they having a girls soccer team at Cheyenne this year?
They're having a team.
Yeah.
Next year.
Yeah. So you'll have to play against them. Maybe.
Yeah.
It's an interesting dynamic. There's so much stuff going on with that. Is that still recording? You can check on it.
Yeah.
Okay. What is? Do you see
Wait,
like
maybe
some
not.
bars?
Is the red light no, it's still recording.
Okay, good. Can you see like the bars on there that say like time and then charge? It should be in the top corner maybe. Or there should be a thing that says like 10 minutes or something.
I don't see any numbers.
Okay. All right. I got the first review session, so if the second one doesn't record, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
But anybody else? Everybody's on?
Two different size cups. Bigger one.
A lot of people that either forgot or changed their mind about coming, but that's okay. Okay, so I like to start with just explaining the format of the test. Test formats are always the same in this class. So the first 50 questions are matching in groups of 10. And since there's 5 chapters on the test, and there's 50 questions, how many questions do you think there are from each chapter? Yep, even my social studies math says there'd be 10 for each chapter. Exactly. So if you were in class today, we addressed a lot of the questions that are going to be on the test. I actually looked at the test, and the questions we had in class today are very similar. So if you paid attention, wrote those down, that should help you out. So, no, that's fine, no problem. The first 10 questions would be on Chapter 6, Sexuality. The second 10 would be on chapter 7, deviance. The next group of 10 would be on social stratification, chapter 8. Then chapter 9 would be on global stratification. And then chapter 10 would be on gender stratification. So I don't take a lot of time going over those because I think generally all you have to do is study and then you get it, because it's just memorizing the definition. Most people struggle with the application questions, so I want to spend more time on that. Is that okay? You guys agree? So I'll just give you some examples of some terms that I think are important for each chapter, and then we'll move on to the application. So let me just ask you, chapter 6, what are some terms that you think would be important for that chapter? That's on sexuality.
Gender role.
Okay. So gender roles, just sexuality itself. What else? Okay, sexual orientation. So what are some examples of sexual orientation? Yeah, so some of those terms would be on there: homosexuality, heterosexuality, etc. Intersexual, transsexual, and so on. Okay, so I mean, you guys just listed like half of them from that section. How about chapter 7 on deviance?
Organized crime.
Okay, so the types of crime that we addressed that are related to business. So organized, corporate, white collar.
The punishment.
Deviance itself. What else did you say?
Oh, I said punishment.
Punishment. Okay.
Isn't there primary and secondary?
Okay, types of deviance, primary and secondary. Different theories related to deviance. Okay. How about chapter 8 on stratification in general? Okay, caste, class, meritocracy. Good. What determines class often? Okay, income. So what's another term that's related to income but different?
Wealth.
Wealth. Yep. Yep. How about the ability to change social classes?
Social mobility.
Social mobility. Good.
What about, isn't caste systems born?
Yeah, that's more in the application section. But yeah, I'm just kind of identifying the terms right now. Yep. Okay, how about chapter 9 on global stratification? What are some important concepts from that section? Okay, high, middle, low income nations. Good.
Relative and absolute poverty.
Relative and absolute poverty. Okay, colonial and neo-colonialism.
Types of slavery.
Yep, that's some of these that you're listing are also in the application, not necessarily the matching section, but yeah, if you're saying something that's important, I'm gonna say yeah. Okay, and then how about the chapter we're on now, chapter 10? Like the quiz we had today, just to see what you guys know, right? You wrote those down, those are the concepts. So gender roles, patriarchy, matriarchy, feminism, etc. Okay, so those are the section, or the matching section. Generally, people do pretty well in that. I would say the class average on the matching section typically is like a low B, like 84, mid B, 84, 85, 86, something like that. The class average on the application section typically is like 70. So basically what you have to do in the application section is try to apply some of the theories to an analysis of whatever you're given. So let's start with chapter 6 and talk about some theories on application of those concepts. So chapter 6 again is on sexuality. Let's first try to explain how each of the three main theories would address sexuality in some way, somehow. So functionalists, right? Macro or micro? First of all. Macro, okay. So Functionalists assume that anything that continues in society somehow, some way is functional. So, people keep getting married, people keep getting in romantic relationships, people keep getting involved in all elements of those romantic relationships, including sexuality. So, from a functionalist standpoint, what's one of the main functions of sexuality in society? Yeah, reproduction. So, to perpetuate society. What else could functionalists argue is a function of sexuality?
Love somebody?
Is what?
Does he love somebody?
Okay, so binding people together in relationships. Good. Okay, so be able to identify some of those. Now, how about conflict theorists? How would conflict theorists analyze sexuality? Macro, micro, first of all. Okay, macro. And then how would they analyze sexuality? Okay, so how people use sexuality for control and power. Good.
STDs and rape and prostitution and all that.
Okay. Yeah, all of those terms could relate to any of the three theories, but they would tend to focus on how those things are used by some people to control another group. And then how about SI theorists? What are they going to look at with sexuality?
Isn't that just
Yeah, or small groups. So how those things, norms, values, whatever, are interpreted by individuals involved. So what one person might find attractive is different from another person, right? That's a SI analysis. Okay, so let me give you some examples then a little bit more specifically. Norms and sexuality as it relates to functionalism now. To functionalists, norms exist to carry out a purpose. They have a function, right? So first, could you give me some examples of some norms with sexuality that are really strong?
Incest.
Okay, incest, taboo. If they say taboo, that's like very strong. Okay, so what would one function of the incest taboo be?
Well, not allowed to, if you have like complications, like something.
Yep. So the likelihood of birth defects when chromosomes are paired that are similar is higher. So by having a norm that says, don't hook up with your brother or sister or your first cousin or second cousin, unless you're, what's her name from Mean Girls, right? That discourages or makes it less likely that disorders in children will happen. What else? What are some other functions of the incest taboo?
Well, there's like the positive of having a kid.
Okay. Okay, let's just imagine now that it was totally okay. There are no norms about dating your brothers or sisters, and you're in a family with like 6 and there's 3 boys and 3 girls. And you're all sitting around at supper. And like, how weird would that be? You know what I mean? So there's already a little bit of competition amongst people, like in high schools for romantic relationships, whatever. Like I remember when I was younger, I remember some people getting in fights over girls. Okay, like literally getting in a fight over girls. So not just like arguing, like they literally got mad and started punching each other. So could you imagine that if, like in a household? Just imagine like, I'm not gonna go all the way there, but just imagine the implications if it was okay to do that stuff with people you're related to, like no matter what, and you're all in the same house, and if there'd be a lot of bad stuff there going on. So, I don't know, just be able to apply and give some examples of that, okay? About how many people identify themselves as homosexual? In the United States, about how many people identify themselves as homosexual? 20%, 8%, what's the number?
16.
60%?
16.
Oh, I thought you said 60. I was like, whoa. No, 16 is kind of high. So, no, it's even less than 6 too. It depends. It depends on males or females too.
More females.
But yeah, it's like, yeah, it says that in the book, doesn't it? Okay, so like less than 2%. Okay, so be able to kind of look at some of those stats and apply those a little bit. Okay, what are some dysfunctions that are associated with pornography? Okay, promotes violence, promotes treating people as objects. Anything else? Yep. Leads to breakdowns and problems in the family. So there's a variety of things that are dysfunctional of pornography. Same thing can be argued with prostitution, right? What are some arguments the text makes about functions of prostitution or pornography?
Doesn't it allow like the unwanted or like less attractive people? Yeah, for now. I guess to have partners, or I can't remember what you're talking about.
Yeah, so it provides a means by which people who are like uninterested in pursuing romantic relationships to have access to sexual activity. People that would have difficulty being in relationships, it gives them access to that as well. So that's an argument for a function of prostitution and pornography as well. Okay, another theme that gets addressed here a little bit is the nature-nurture debate as well. So if you argue that sexual orientation is due to how you were born, is that nature or nurture?
Nurture. I mean, nature.
Nature, yep. If it's your environment or how you were raised, it would be nurture. How about deviance? If I say that Michael is like violent, okay, let's assume he's just secretly the most violent person we know. Okay, so if I assume that he's violent and I argue that it's because of genetics, like I should worry about you too, because you're his cousin, right? Because it could be biologically tied. So when I walk out, I'm going to make sure you guys go first so you're not behind me at the end of this review session, right? Okay. If I say it's because of how people are raised, then it's due to nurture. Okay, so be able to apply that nature-nurture debate as well. Now, you guys remember when we talked about strain theory? Merton's strain theory identified 5 different things. What were the variables that he looked at? Okay, the means or the way by which people achieve something. And then what else? Remember the box? We did that for an assignment. Okay, so the means, and then what's the other variable? No, they would all have to do with morals, the means or the other piece. But what's the other variable in the box? No. Yeah. The other thing could go with or could go against culture. I'm just asking what the thing is in general. If you look at the box, it says means on top. What's the other thing on the side? Goals. So what page is that? 116? 160, page 160. So if you agree with the normal goals and you agree with the typical means, like you need money, you go get a job, right? You agree with the traditional means, you agree with the goal. What would that be? Conformity. If you agree with the goal, but you come up with different means, what would that be? Innovation. Okay, so be able to identify and apply some of those. Okay, let's say Haley was born in India in the 1800s, or she's born in a village where it's like the tribal rulers are always the tribal rulers and their kids are and whatever. Would she be in a class system, a caste system, or a meritocracy? Caste system. Caste system. Yep. How about if you're born in a society and it's totally based on how hard you work or how smart you are? Yep, meritocracy. What if it's a little both? No, egalitarian would be meritocracy. Or no, it wouldn't be a meritocracy. It would be, it'd technically be a caste system because no matter how you were born, how hard you work, whatever, you'd all be the same, right? So it'd be a caste system. But anyways, what is it if it's a little bit of class, or I just told you the answer. It's a class system, yeah. So a little bit of meritocracy, a little bit of caste would be a class system. So it'll give you some scenarios and you have to identify which one it would be. Okay. If you have somebody that has like a PhD and they get paid very low and they don't get a lot of recommendation, what type of status consistency would they have? High or low? Low. Yep. So what if you are the president of a university? High, right? You're making a lot of money, you have a decent amount of power, and like people know you, okay? So if stuff matches up, if it's like high power, high money, high prestige, high status consistency. If it's low prestige, low power, a lot of money, then that would be low status consistency. Okay, let's say Taylor starts out really, really poor. She's born in a poor family, but then she goes to school and works hard and gets a job as like a neurosurgeon, best in the country, makes like millions of dollars a year. What type of social mobility would that be? What type of social mobility? Intra, because it was within her lifetime. Okay. Yep. So she starts out really poor, and then ends up becoming wealthy. So let's say now, like, your grandparents were really poor, and then your parents went to school and became middle class, and got a college degree and worked really hard to put you through college, and then you end up being upper class. What's that called? Intergenerational. Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Okay. There's some questions and application stuff about high, middle, and low income countries. Give me some examples of high income countries.
So Canada.
U.S., Canada, Britain,
Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia, South Korea, Japan. Yeah, so those countries generally are found in the northern hemisphere. Okay, middle income countries, where are they generally found?
South America.
South America, Eastern Europe. Asia's kind of a little bit of everything. But yeah, South America and Eastern Europe. Okay, low income countries generally are found where? Africa, some Asian countries too. Okay, so there's a section where it says which of the following countries is a high, which of the following is middle, which of the following is low. Be able to apply that. Think about those rules of thumb, but also think about what you know. Like, Asia's kind of all over the place, but if you see a country that's in the Middle East and Asia, you can guess that it's going to be high because of the amount of oil they have there, right? So be able to identify and apply some things with that. Okay, also, there were 3 researchers that addressed gender in various societies: Margaret Mead, George Murdoch, and Janet Lever. So I see, like, there's 6 questions that address research by Mead, Murdoch, and Lever.
What's the research name?
Who?
What's the last girl?
Lever, Janet. So all of their theories, or all of their had to do with gender. Mead talked a lot about gender roles, so expected behavior. So what was the expected behavior she found? Murdoch talked about stratification and like occupations and gender. And then Lever talked about norms and games in kids. So when it comes to boys and girls, what are some differences in norms and games that you see with kids? You two guys were playing play or whatever. So what are some norms that you saw with them? Like if you were the typical boy or girl, what were you playing? Whatever, soccer doesn't matter. So generally, the boys want victory. Girls want to build social relationships. That's what they found. Okay. Okay. What type of slavery is it if you directly own another person? You directly own another person. What's that called? Is it debt bondage? No. That's chattel slavery. Yep. Talked about hiring. Okay, in the United States, where is there a lot of poverty? Okay, border cities. What else?
What was the question?
Where is there a lot of poverty in the United States? So border cities. What else? Yeah, central big cities like Detroit, Los Angeles, whatever. And one other variable. There's a few of these in North Dakota. Yeah, reservations. Good. Okay, there's two explanations for poverty in low-income nations. One is modernization and one is dependency theory. If I were you, it's because of a lack of technology. Which one fits more there?
Modernization.
Modernization. If I say it's because of a lack of development of cultural beliefs, what is it? Modernization. Also, if it's because one country is taking advantage of another, what would it be? Dependency. Yep. Okay. Other than functionalism, conflict, and SI, the main thing that's on the test, or the theory that has the most questions, is coming up now. It's the Davis-Moore thesis. There's 5 questions on the Davis-Moore thesis. Yeah, and neo-colonialism. So if the British exploit the Indians directly, colonialism. If a company is really wealthy and they exploit people in another place, neo-colonialism. Okay? So with the Davis-Moore thesis, that says that different occupations and positions in society have to have different rewards to attract talent to those positions, right? So, like literally, this is what all 5 of those questions say. It says, pick the quote that would most agree with the Davis-Moore thesis. So 5 of the questions start with that, and then it gives you 5 quotes, and you have to apply it. So if you know the definition, and then you can apply it, you'll be okay. All right? Okay, there'll be like 4 more minutes and then we'll be done. Just a couple more things. Weber talked about socioeconomic status. So what are the 3 things that he tried to address there? It's not just money, what else mattered? Power and prestige. So like, do people think your occupation is important? How much power do you have and how much money you make? What's that? You just can't, right?
It's upside down.
Weber, spelled with a W. And no money. You don't have to have all of them. It's just if you're trying to explain somebody's, what do you call it, socioeconomic status, you need to know all 3 things. So the example I used to explain this was the president. Do you guys remember? So power, does he have a lot of power? Heck yeah. Does he have a lot of prestige? Yeah, there's been less than 50 presidents in the United States ever, right? are there people that make a lot more money than him?
Yep.
Pretty much every professional athlete makes more than him. There's probably 20, 30 people in this area that make more money than Obama. And we're not like there's a lot more people that make more money in New York and stuff, right? So you need to know all of those, okay? What's the difference between income and wealth? What's the difference between income and wealth?
Income's like how much you make like a year.
Yep. So income is what you make, how much is coming in. Wealth is how much you control. So, yeah. So like the example I used was my grandpa. Right now, decent amount of wealth. He built some houses and sold them. Like kind of did the flip house model to earn some money. And then he has like a pension and gets some money coming in from that. And 401k, whatever. But I make more money than he does right now. Like if you added up how much money comes in a given year. But my net worth is negative because I have a mortgage and student loans and stuff, right? So he has more wealth than me, but I have more income than him. Okay, give me an example of a pink collar occupation. Nurse, kindergarten teacher, dental hygienist. How about blue collar? Sheet metal worker.
That's white. That's white.
CEO is white collar.
Blue,
Truck
like
driver.
an oil miner.
Yeah. Warehouse worker. Okay. And then white collar is like teacher, accountant, stuff like that. Pink collar is feminine. Yep. Okay, and the last thing would be types of feminism. We're going to talk about that in class tomorrow. So there's 3 types of feminism. Be able to identify which one. So,
Teacher, it's like, are they based on
what do you mean?
blue collar, white collar? Blue collar generally makes less money. That's
Not necessarily. I bet the average blue collar worker in the state right now makes more than I do. And I have a master's degree and 11 years of experience, you know. So it's not just money, it's like blue collar is manual labor.
American Horse Story.
White collar is mental labor. Pink collar is woman jobs. Okay? Okay, Cringley, you want to hit stop on that for me?
If I can figure that out.
If you just close it, it'll stop.
Oh.
And then